I don't know. Maybe our next guest can correct me if I'm wrong, but in my mind, Jenin Younes, who is litigation counsel for the new Civil Liberties Union. Miss Younes, welcome to the show. Is there a... Oh, now, okay, Fox and Friends is in on Bob Saget, too. So that's two Sagets and a Poitier. So, Miss Younes, welcome in. I mean, look, no disrespect to any of these people, but is there a bigger story than the Supreme Court deciding whether or not we all have to be made to take a medicine this morning? Hi.
There's no bigger story than that. It's the decision that the court reaches is going to have huge implications for the country now and for the foreseeable future.
I don't, and I maybe this is obvious, or maybe I'm being a little sarcastic and silly, but this goes into effect today, does it not? Legally, if it stands.
I believe that one would have to start getting to have a full course of vaccination by the deadline. I think of February 9th. One would have to start today, so it's an effective deadline of today.
I mean. I literally, no one is talking about this. Did I hit my head?
Well, in my world, this is all anyone is talking about. So I guess I don't have the same impression, but
no, I don't mean you're not. I mean, I'm talking about people with microphones and cameras in front of their faces. They're not.
Yeah. I'm surprised by the lack of attention to, especially on the liberal side of the spectrum. I mean, certainly not the New York Times and Washington Post.
Well, all right. Let's talk about what the new Civil Liberties Alliance is doing about this. How does what you're doing relate to what we heard in the Supreme Court on Friday? Or are they separate entities altogether? And how do you think you'll proceed here?
Oh, that's a good question. Our office has a number of cases that are trying to combat vaccine mandates. However, we don't have any that particularly deal with the OSHA mandate, which is the one that the Supreme Court, actually, the Supreme Court is deciding two cases, the OSHA mandate and the CMS workers case. Those were the ones that were heard on Friday. We had hoped or thought that possibly a stay would be issued over the weekend because of the deadline of today, but so far there's not been any news about that.
How do you? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but before you can continue, can we just analyze what that means exactly from your legal analysis? Why the expedited schedule only to hear nothing from them?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know why it's possible something could come today. I think there's a decent possibility of that, given that a number of the judges noted the deadline of today. That one would need to get the shot to start the course of vaccination by today. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. Some of the judges seem concerned about the idea of issuing a stay. So a stay would just be sort of an emergency, issued on an emergency temporary basis, an administrative stay, just because of the imminent deadline. That wouldn't necessarily mean that there would be a favorable outcome later.
Oh, I stand corrected. MSNBC reporting Supreme Court appears likely to strike down federal large employer vaccine mandate. That's MSNBC's Morning Joe, who just put that up on a chyron just now. So maybe that's why they're not talking about it. They fully intend the Supreme Court to do away with it. Do you think that's it?
That could be it. I mean, based on what I heard on Friday, I think I don't want to be too optimistic, but I do think there's a very good chance. Six of the 9 justices had serious concerns about the constitutionality of the OSHA mandate. I do think the CMS mandate is likely to stand based on what I heard.
Do you think it's going to be closer, or you think it'll be like a majority, like a strong majority that would stand with the CMS? And by the way, the CMS mandate, that's I'm going to dumb this down for myself, and you correct me where I'm wrong. That's basically people that administer medicine and health care that receive Medicare funding, federal funding, hospitals and places like that. Nurses, doctors, they've got to take the shot or they'll lose their job. You think the court would stand with that? Have I summarized that about right?
Yeah, that's right. I think because of the nature of their jobs, that they're in hospitals working around the most vulnerable people, the court seemed to have more trouble with the notion of not requiring vaccination in those circumstances. So I can't predict for sure, but if I was, my guess is that the OSHA mandate is going to be struck down and the CMS one will not. Now, as to your earlier question, so our office has a number of cases that we've brought a couple against universities, and we have 2 cases against the federal employee mandate, which is also part of Biden's executive order. and then one against the contractor mandate. So those are different. Those would not be directly affected by whatever the court decides on the OSHA case and the CMS case. However, a number of the principles at stake are similar, so it could affect it. That's essentially what it boils down to. On the other hand, the cases that we have against state universities, where we're arguing that the state universities shouldn't be able to require their employees to get the vaccine, those would not be affected in the same way because these other cases are really about the federal government's power.
Jenin Younes with us. She is the litigation counsel for the new Civil Liberties Alliance. These cases get sticky whenever you're talking about the federal government funding things and issuing money and paying people that work for the government. When you're dealing with your employment and your paycheck ostensibly coming from the federal government, that's often when courts start to side with the government, more often than not. True or false?
That's right. And actually, yes. And that's an issue that we've been up against with these cases, where they're sort of saying, well, you don't necessarily have the right to your employment. You know, we're arguing, and some of the other organizations that are fighting these mandates are saying you're effectively being coerced. I mean, if you're being told you're going to lose your job unless you get the vaccine, you're basically being forced. Most people have to feed their families. They can't just quit their jobs. But the other side, and often the judges, are saying, you don't have a right to this job, go get another job. I'm hoping that we'll have more success with those arguments. As more, it's most places now are requiring vaccines. And now that the federal government has this plan, it's not really actually true to say just go get another job, because most employers are requiring them.
You're not here to discuss this, and I don't mean to back you into a corner with this. You can punt and say I'm not commenting because I don't know the facts of it if you'd like. However, I'll ask you this anyway, and you tell me if you think I'm onto something here. 60 Minutes did a piece last night talking about this amazing number of people, millions and millions of Americans in the last year who've just decided to hell with it. They're going to leave their jobs. And I watch this and I have to laugh, thinking to myself, do these people really believe that everyone's just decided to up and have a course correction in their lives all at once en masse? There's really no correlation in these people's minds at all with what's going on right now?
Yeah, I know. It's really quite funny that they're pretending it doesn't have to do, and that's an argument that comes up a lot in these cases is, for instance, it actually came up in the healthcare workers case at the lower level that there was going to be a shortage of healthcare workers if these mandates went through. And they the government keeps trying to, deny that that's actually happening and saying, well, we might lose more people if they're afraid that their colleagues aren't going to be vaccinated. And there are a lot of brave people who are really standing up for their I've had a few clients who've actually been fired at this point, and are in difficult financial circumstances because they really want to stand up for their right not to get this vaccine.
Here's another tricky question for someone who is of legal mind and who is an adult and not a bloviating talk show host, so I respect that you may not want to talk about this either. But I got to ask you what you make of Sotomayor and her comments that even Rochelle Walensky of the CDC had to come out and correct when she said 100,000 children are hospitalized and that this Omicron variant is more deadly than Delta. These are just wildly factually inaccurate statements. And is this Supreme Court justice ignorant of the facts, or is this purposeful hyperbole, or how do you read it?
It sounded to me as though Sotomayor was really ignorant of the facts. At the three liberal justices, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan, made a number of shocking factual misstatements, I would say. There is an insistence that the vaccine stop transmission, which is obviously one of the justifications for mandates, because it becomes harder to justify mandates when it's about protecting the individual, because then, well, can the government tell you that you should, have to exercise every day to be healthier or eat green vegetables? So, even Walensky has said that, again, that the vaccines don't stop transmission, but all three of them were insisting that they do, that there's, masks are proven to work in the workplace. I mean, we know that the evidence that surgical and cloth masks work to stop the spread of this virus is is not very strong at all. So they really, it sounded to me as though Sotomayor just had her facts wrong, that she probably watches MSNBC all the time and doesn't really, has a warped view of what's going on.
I was unable to actually hear the answers from the attorneys in the room, but I was watching some feed of the questions on Friday, and One of my favorite questions came from Clarence Thomas, who I suspect asked it with a twinkle in his eye when he said, "Are there any other ways to treat COVID than the vaccine?"
Yeah.
I would have
Yeah.
loved to have seen the faces and heard some of the answers. Did you hear any more about the answer to that question from Thomas?
I don't recall that question and answer. It's possible. It was a long argument. It went for over 2 hours, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't. But it is a good question, and there were a number of good questions. I think Alito, it could have been Gorsuch, asked whether there's any other OSHA mandate that requires the employee to do something that could be harmful to him or her. And whoever was asked was unable to come up with a good answer to that, because he was making the point that wearing a helmet on site is different from taking a vaccine, which can cause adverse effects no matter how small the risk.
Have we? And again, you'll have to. I forgive my ignorance. You would know. I don't know. You've studied the law. Is there a historical precedent for the United States government insisting people take a medicine they may or may not want? Have we ever been in a place where we're talking about mass ingestion of medicine in the public by fiat?
No, not from the federal government. And I think that is sort of the basis of the best arguments, in my opinion, that that our side had, the anti-mandate side had. There's something called the major questions doctrine. So if there's no statute addressing a particular thing that affects millions of Americans and involves billions of dollars, which this mandate does, then the idea is that Congress would have spoken directly to it if it intended to allow for it. So here, the OSHA statute is being used in a way that I think far exceeds the intent of its reach. And so, the Ben Flowers and Scott Keller, who are arguing against the mandate, made that point that Congress would have spoken directly to this if it intended to allow the federal government to require everybody to take a vaccine.
So, Jenin, Younes, the folks that you're talking about representing going forward, your class action lawsuit to block the federal contractor vaccine mandate, this would be things like defense contractors, people that work in the outside private sector who have entered into a partnership to supply goods or services to the federal government. Is that more accurate?
Yes, that's right. And again, it's similar. So Biden instructed federal contractors to use the procurement statute, which is about more efficient procurement of goods and services. And again, we're arguing that that's not at all what that statute was intended to do. And the overall thrust of the argument against Biden's mandates is that he's basically commandeering statutes to go far beyond what they were supposed to do, what Congress intended for them to do, in order to impose a vaccine mandate basically on the country. I mean, this is affecting millions and millions of Americans.
This would be similar to the airlines, I guess, and their partnership with the federal government, and the federal government sort of threatening them too. Same deal. Or Boeing, headquartered in Philadelphia, not headquartered, but has a large outpost in Philadelphia. Is that something similar?
Well, to my knowledge, the airlines are acting independently, so that's different. Although, some of them acted independently. Now, I guess they're under the federal contractor mandate. But United has imposed a vaccine mandate before the federal government. So it is different when the companies are doing a mandate by themselves, especially if it's a private company. It gets much harder to make legal arguments against it. When it's the government forcing private companies or the government as the employee, then it's different because for various reasons.
So you handicap this right now as probably people in healthcare. The Supreme Court will probably say, yeah, you people in healthcare probably should have to go ahead and get it.
That was my read on the argument, and I'll be honest that I was because they went so long, I wasn't able to listen to the whole thing the way that I was with the OSHA mandate, so I don't have as good of a take on it, but that was my read on what they were saying, and based on other assessments that I read later, I think it's likely to stand, which is unfortunate. And especially, I'd like to make the point that people with natural immunity, which people in healthcare have very high rates of natural immunity because they were on the front line fighting the virus at the beginning. It's really too bad that those people are going to be forced to take a vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, when 700 people at one of the preeminent clinics in the country, the Mayo Clinic, decide they don't want to do this and they lose their jobs over it, it makes me pause and ask, why do healthcare people, why are they willing to lose their paychecks over this as opposed to take it? I would think any sane, logical person would stop and ask, why do so many healthcare professionals not want to do this? I would think people would stop and ask, at least ponder, if there was a mass wave of attorney resignations over some issue, I would be curious to know what attorneys think about it, not what my opinion of it is. Right?
Right. That's a very good point. Unfortunately, the issue has been so politicized, and there's been this idea that the vaccine is almost like a perfect silver bullet, and it's taken on this religious significance to a lot of people. You can't question it. So people aren't asking those questions.
Sadly, it's reached the Supreme Court. I mean, that kind of mentality is clearly infected even justices on the Supreme Court, right? Sounds like it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, as we heard, I mean, and you mentioned Sotomayor and Kagan asked similar questions, and Breyer as well. I mean, again, just completely contravening. Their questions showed that they had no knowledge of the facts about this virus.
How does this, and I mean this earnestly, from a purely legal perspective, the fight for years and years, for decades and decades, the hysterics, the marching, the pro-choice movement in this country, particularly driven by left-wing women, how do they look at this and not see the irony in the fight? Do they not?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're asking. I used to actually identify as a liberal, so you're asking the right person. I think I have a unique insight into it. That I would say that they don't see it as an intrusion into, as an intrusion, the way that they see someone not being able to get an abortion. And I'm not saying I agree with this position at all. I'm very anti-vaccine mandate. But I think, again, and it sort of relates to what I said earlier, I think, again, they've decided the vaccine is the perfect way to stop the virus. It's no big deal. There are no harm. They really don't believe there are any harms that could come from it. And, this is a ridiculous position to take. And I'm not anti-vax at all. I got the vaccine myself. I definitely urge my parents to. I think especially it looks like the data is if you're over 50, very good idea to get it. But, talk to your doctor depending on your circumstances. But there are lots of issues, for instance, with young men and myocarditis. The data is coming out that the numbers are higher, and that's especially the case with the booster. We don't know, the effects on children. There have been no studies of what the vaccine does to children with naturally acquired immunity, and now a lot of cities in the United States are requiring children to show proof of vaccination in order to enter what we would call places of public accommodation, like a restaurant or a movie theater. And there haven't been studies conducted on pregnant women, for instance, who are often, I've talked to many of them who call me and are being forced to take this vaccine.
Jenin, I just put on my Facebook page, it wasn't a right-wing kook site. It was the New York Times who just published a piece yesterday about women's menstrual cycles and the vaccine.
Yeah.
I mean, and Facebook fact-checked that from the New York Times, no less.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, a number of people were suspended from Twitter for saying things along those lines. And now they're trying to downplay it and say, well, it's not that big of a deal. It looks like it's just a one-day delay or something like that. I mean, if it's causing a hormonal shift, that's something to be asking questions about. And I certainly understand parents being worried about vaccinating their young daughters, and you don't know what. And then likewise, the myocarditis risk for young men. So the public health establishment has really made a drastic error by overselling these as completely safe and effective instead of acknowledging that there are some questions about long-term safety, that they're not that effective in stopping transmission. Instead of sending the message that, they appear to be safe and for the most part good at reducing severe illness, but it's a good idea to make a personalized risk-benefit assessment and talk to your doctor instead of everyone must take this vaccine or you're a bad person. And I think that's been extremely detrimental to, I'm not a public health person, but I read a lot of it, look around a lot, and I think it's really broken down trust between the public health establishment and the public.
You've identified that you have different politics than me. I didn't know that coming in, and it doesn't matter to me whatsoever. It should seem to me that every American could get behind the universally accepted concept that as Americans, the government can't force us to ingest a medicine That doesn't seem hard. That doesn't seem like a long walk for all Americans to unify around.
No, it doesn't, and it shouldn't. But there's unfortunately been a very effective campaign on the other side to insist that you're basically that you're a bad person if you won't take this vaccine. It's taken on a moral dimension, and it's reached absurd levels.
Thank you for your work. I hope we can have you back. The NCLA, this is the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and Jenin Younes is the name of our guest, filing a class action lawsuit to block the federal contractor vaccine mandate. Would you come back as this develops? I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on how this is progressing.
I would be very happy to come back. Thank you so much for having me.